In the biting chill of a New York winter, Henry Miles stood at a lonely bus stop, his worn olive-green jacket his only shield against the cold. Once a structural engineer who built hospitals and schools, he was now a 48-year-old widower, a father separated from his son, clutching 5 rejected resumes and a fading hope. Yet, when he saw a stranger, a woman in a silk blouse shivering out of place and unprepared for the storm, he didn't hesitate. He gave her his only jacket, expecting nothing in return. That single act of kindness, born from a heart that had lost everything but compassion, would unravel a story of connection, redemption, and a love that rebuilt 2 broken lives. If you've ever believed one small gesture can change the world, this story will pull you in and hold you close. Henry Miles stood at the bus stop, his shoulders hunched against the biting wind, his olive-green jacket barely holding together. The fabric was thin, frayed at the seams with a clumsy patch of duct tape clinging to one elbow. It was his only defense against the New York winter, a flimsy barrier between him and the relentless cold. At 48, he carried the weight of too many losses. His wife gone, his engineering career reduced to memory, his home now just the open sky. In his hand, he gripped a tattered manila folder holding 5 resumes, each one a plea for a chance, each one returned with polite rejections. He glanced at the pharmacy sign glowing across the street, 8:36 p.m. The bus was late as usual. He was a father, a widower, and by the city's definition, homeless. Tonight, though, he was just a man waiting for a ride that felt like it might never come. The wind sliced through the air, sharp and unforgiving. Henry pulled his jacket tighter, his fingers numb around the folder. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound cutting through the night. Click, click, the sound of heels on icy pavement. She emerged from the snowy haze, a figure out of place in the dim glow of the streetlight. Mid-30s, perhaps, dressed in a silk blouse soaked through at the shoulders, a pencil skirt, and pumps sinking into the slush. No coat. Her arms were crossed tightly, her wet hair plastered to her face, her eyes darting down the empty street. She stepped under the bus stop's flimsy shelter, silent, trembling from the cold. Her breath puffed out in small, foggy clouds, her hands shaking as she tried to hold herself together. She didn't belong here. Not in this storm, not dressed like that. She looked like someone who'd been plucked from a boardroom and dropped into a snowbank, polished but unprepared. Henry tried not to stare, his gaze drifting to the ground. The wind howled again, fiercer this time, and she flinched, curling into herself, her lips pressed into a thin, pale line. Something stirred in him, a reflex, not a decision. He didn't weigh the cost or consider the consequences. He just acted. Shrugging off his jacket, he held it out to her, the worn fabric dangling from his hand. She blinked, startled, her eyes meeting his. "You don't have to do that," she said, her voice soft but firm, like she wasn't used to accepting help. Henry managed a smile, the kind that felt heavy, not quite reaching his eyes. "I've lost enough today," he said quietly. "This is just a jacket. You need it more than I do." She hesitated, her gaze flickering between him and the offered coat. Then slowly she reached out, her cold fingers brushing his as she took it. She wrapped the jacket around herself, its oversized warmth swallowing her frame. She inhaled, catching faint traces of soap and coffee clinging to the fabric. It was too big, too worn, but it was warm. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the snow hitting the pavement. They stood in silence after that, the storm swirling around them. The bus's headlights finally pierced the darkness, its engine rumbling as it pulled up. She stepped toward it, then paused, turning back. "What's your name?" she asked. "Henry," he said simply. "I'm Caroline." She reached into her purse, pulling out a sleek black business card. "In case you ever need anything." He nodded, taking it with a polite dip of his head and slipped it into his folder without a glance. He'd been handed gestures like this before. Kind words, cards, promises that led nowhere. She stepped onto the bus, the jacket still wrapped tightly around her. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment before the doors hissed shut and the bus vanished into the night. Henry stood alone again, the cold biting deeper now without his jacket. But the shiver running through him wasn't just from the wind. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the woman wasn't just another stranger. She was Caroline Hart, the self-made CEO of Hartbridge Capital, one of Manhattan's youngest and most formidable leaders. And that moment, that simple act of giving, would linger with her forever. Carolyn hadn't meant to end up here, not at a grimy bus stop, soaked to the bone, her heels sinking into slush, her phone dead, and her carefully ordered life unraveling. That morning, her driver had quit without warning. Her assistant had forgotten to book the town car, and a marathon of boardroom battles and a tense investor call had left her drained. All she'd wanted was escape, a moment of quiet. So she'd slipped out the back of her office building, telling no one, and walked. She hadn't ridden a bus in years, not since she was a teenager clawing her way out of a life that offered no promises. Now, slumped in the hard plastic seat of the bus, she stared at her reflection in the window, a blurred, ghostly version of herself. Henry's jacket draped over her like a shield, its faint scent of soap and mint grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. She'd met countless people, powerful, polished, calculated, but no one like him, not in a long time. Her apartment was a fortress of silence. Steel, marble, glass, no trace of warmth or chaos. She kicked off her ruined heels, set them by the door, and carefully removed the jacket. As she did, something crinkled inside, a soft, unexpected sound. Curious, she reached into the inner pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, its edges worn and smudged with time. She unfolded it with care. It was a child's drawing, scrawled in crayon. Two stick figures labeled Dad and Me, a lopsided heart between them, and at the bottom in shaky handwriting, I love you, Daddy, Noah. Her breath caught. Noah. The name hit her like a forgotten song, stirring something deep and raw. She sank onto the edge of her sleek designer couch, the drawing trembling in her hands. This wasn't just a man who'd given her his coat. This was a father carrying his son's love in his pocket, even now, even in this cold, even with nothing left. Her mind spiraled back to a night she'd never shaken off. 12 years old, homeless, hungry, invisible in the winter's grip. A stranger had appeared then, too, a man with kind eyes and a coat that smelled of tobacco and leather. He draped it over her shoulders and said, You'll be all right, sweetheart, I promise. She'd never seen him again. But that moment had reshaped her life. It had inspired Thomas's place, the shelter she'd built to honor him. And now another stranger had reached out in the same way, offering her not just warmth, but a reminder of something human, something real. Sleep wouldn't come that night. The city hummed below her, indifferent and endless. But in her hand, she held something fragile, a piece of someone's heart. She pressed a button on her desk. Rachel, she said, her voice low but steady. I need you to find someone. Of course, her assistant replied. Who? His name is Henry. That's all I know. He gave me his jacket last night at the 56th and Madison bus stop, around 8:30 p.m. A pause. I'll start with traffic cams and MTA logs, discreetly. And Rachel, Carolyn added, this stays between us. It took 4 days, countless calls, and more effort than most of her high-stakes deals demanded. But finally a name surfaced. Henry Miles, former structural engineer, no current address, last seen sleeping in an old truck in the Bronx, its plates long gone. Carolyn did not know what she'd say when she found him, didn't know what she owed him. But she knew one thing with unshakable certainty. No one who gives their only coat on a night like that should ever be left to feel forgotten. The winter air bit at Caroline Hart's skin as she stepped out of her sleek black car, her boots sinking slightly into the snow-dusted gravel of the empty lot. She wasn't dressed for the boardroom today. No stilettos, no tailored suit, just a long wool coat, practical boots, and the same steely resolve in her eyes that had carried her to the helm of Hartbridge Capital. Her breath clouded in the frigid air, curling like faint whispers as she scanned the scene. Tucked behind a loading dock, half hidden in the shadows, sat a battered 1998 Chevy truck. Its paint was peeling, the windshield spiderwebbed with cracks, and the tires sagged into the slush as if the vehicle itself had given up. Through the fogged-up windows, she could just make out a shape inside, a silhouette, hunched and still. She moved forward, her boots crunching against the gravel, each step deliberate but not rushed. Her heart thudded, not from fear but from something deeper, a pull she couldn't quite name. The truck's door groaned as it swung open, the sound raw and heavy in the quiet. Henry Miles stepped out. He looked older than she'd pictured, not just in the lines etched into his face, but in the weight that seemed to press down on his shoulders. His hair was grayer than she remembered, thinning at the temples, and his hands were stuffed into the pockets of worn jeans. No jacket to shield him from the cold. His boots, scuffed and faded, matched the ones she'd seen that night. When his eyes met hers, he froze mid-step, blinking as if trying to shake off a dream. Recognition dawned slowly, like sunlight creeping over a frost-covered field. "Claire?" His voice was rough, like gravel scraped across pavement. Caroline's lips curved into a small, hesitant smile. "Hi, Henry." He glanced past her, taking in the polished car, her expensive coat, the way she stood, grounded, unshaken, unlike him, hunched against the cold. His arms crossed over his chest, a reflex of self-protection. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone guarded, almost wary. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I came to find you." Henry let out a low, bitter chuckle, shaking his head as he took a step back. "Why, what's this about?" "I haven't stopped thinking about that night," she said softly. "About what you did." He shook his head again, harder this time, as if trying to dismiss her words. "I didn't do anything. You were cold. I had a jacket, that's all." "No," Carolyn said, her voice gentle but firm. "You gave me your only jacket." He looked away, his jaw tightening, eyes fixed on the slush at his feet. "You didn't know who I was," she continued. "You didn't ask for anything in return. You just gave, and I can't forget that." Henry exhaled, his breath a visible puff in the freezing air. "You tracked me down just to say thanks?" His voice carried a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. Carolyn's smile was tinged with sadness. "No, I came because sometimes people do something truly good, and no one notices. I wanted to notice. I wanted you to know it mattered." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, its edges worn, the crayon lines vibrant despite the years. "I found this in the jacket," she said, holding it out. Henry's expression shifted, his guarded demeanor cracking. He took the paper with trembling hands, his fingers brushing the crayon marks as if they were fragile. He stared at the drawing, a child's sketch of a house, a tree, two stick figures holding hands. "That's my son," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Noah. He drew this years ago." "Is he okay?" Carolyn asked, her voice soft but steady. Henry's gaze stayed on the drawing. "He's in foster care," he said, "until I can get stable again." His voice dropped lower, almost breaking. "I promised him I'd come back." Caroline's throat tightened, a wave of emotion rising in her chest. Not pity, but something heavier, a mix of respect and shared pain. She studied him, this man who had once designed hospitals and schools, now standing in a snow-covered lot, his life reduced to a truck and a folder of job applications. "You were an engineer, weren't you?" she asked. He nodded, his eyes still on the drawing. "Before my wife died, after that, everything fell apart. Sold the house, moved around, took whatever work I could find. Now?" He shrugged, a gesture of defeat. "Now I apply." "Wait, apply again." Carolyn watched him, her mind racing. "I want you to come with me," she said. Henry blinked, startled. "Why?" "I want to show you something," she said. "No suits, no boardrooms, just trust me." He hesitated, his eyes dropping to his worn boots, then lifting to her face. For a fleeting moment, he saw something in her. A flicker of the vulnerable girl she'd once been, hidden behind the sharp confidence of a CEO. "Okay," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Fine." The drive was quiet, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of snow under the tires. Henry fidgeted in the passenger seat, aware of the faint smell of old denim and metal clinging to his clothes. Caroline didn't speak, but every so often she glanced at him, her eyes tracing the lines of his face, the weight he carried. After 25 minutes, the car pulled into a quiet neighborhood. Brick buildings lined the streets, their windows glowing warmly against the gray sky. A painted sign on a fence caught Henry's eye. Thomas's place, a safe space for every child. Carolyn parked and they stepped out. Henry followed her inside, his steps slow, uncertain. The moment he crossed the threshold, he stopped. The air was warm, filled with the sounds of children laughing, reading, playing. Bright murals covered the walls, hand-painted scenes of forests, stars, and smiling faces. Paper hearts, decorated with glitter and crayon, were taped above the doorways. Volunteers moved through the space, tying shoelaces, wiping spills, offering gentle smiles. Henry turned to Caroline, his breath catching. "This place," he started. "I built it," she said softly, "because someone a long time ago gave me their coat and sat with me through the night. It changed everything." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "You reminded me of him, Henry. You didn't ask who I was. You just gave. That kind of person, they change lives." Henry's throat burned, his eyes stinging as he tried to hold it together. It had been years since he'd felt seen, needed, safe. He blinked rapidly, turning his gaze to the children, their laughter a sound he hadn't realized he'd missed. Carolyn touched his arm lightly. "I don't need you to fit into a boardroom, Henry. I need you to remind people what it means to care." They stood later by a large window overlooking the city, the skyline a mix of sharp edges and soft lights. Henry's reflection stared back at him, worn, lined, hesitant. Behind him, Caroline held a manila folder. "This is for you," she said, her voice gentle as she offered it. He turned slowly, taking it with cautious hands. "What is it?" "A proposal," she said. A new beginning." Henry's brow furrowed. "A job?" he repeated, skeptical. She nodded. "Not in engineering, something more human." He raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I want to bring you into my company," she explained. "Not as a number cruncher or a project manager, but as someone who brings perspective, heart, integrity. Someone who's lived the stories we forget in glass-walled offices." Henry let out a dry chuckle, but there was no warmth in it. "You want to hire a homeless man to teach your execs about kindness?" Caroline didn't flinch. "Yes." He shook his head. "That's not a job, Caroline. That's charity with a contract." "No," she said firmly. "It's vision, and you're part of it." He exhaled a long, tight breath and opened the folder slowly. His eyes scanned the page. Title, responsibilities, salary, benefits, a housing stipend, support for family reunification. His hands trembled as he closed it and set it back on the table. "I can't take this." "Why not?" she asked, her voice steady but not pushy. "Because I don't belong in your world," he said, his voice raw. "I sleep in a truck. I don't own a tie. I've messed up more times than I can count. I'm terrified." Carolyn stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "That's exactly why you're perfect for it." He didn't meet her gaze, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Look at me," he said bitterly. "I'm just a guy trying to hold it together long enough to see my kid again. You don't build empires by handing out second chances to men like me." Carolyn paused, her expression calm but unwavering. "Do you know how many people in that building wear masks every day?" she asked. "How many smile while they're breaking inside? You gave me your only jacket, not to impress, not because you knew who I was, but because it was right. That's the kind of leadership I'd follow." Henry closed his eyes, feeling something shift inside him, like a rusted lock finally giving way. "Caroline," he said slowly, "I'm not qualified." "You don't need credentials to teach people how to care," she said. Fear wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it waited. Henry stared out at the city, his thumb tracing the edge of the folder. The voices in his head were familiar, relentless. "You'll mess it up. They'll laugh behind your back. They always do." But then a shadow moved beside him. Carolyn sat down, close but not crowding, her presence steady. No words, just quiet. And for the first time in years, Henry felt the weight of possibility. Fragile, unfamiliar, but real. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the city beyond the window. Caroline Hart stood, her gaze steady on Henry Miles, who sat across from her, his hands clasped tightly as if anchoring himself to the moment. "You haven't opened it," she said at last, her voice cutting through the silence like a gentle breeze. Henry let out a rough chuckle, the kind that carried years of weight. "Didn't think I had to," he replied, his eyes distant. "I already know how this story ends." Carolyn tilted her head. curiosity flickering in her expression. How's that? Henry's voice was low, resigned. People like me don't belong in places like this. You don't build empires like Heartbridge Capital by bringing in guys who wash up at gas station sinks. She didn't counter his words. Instead, she rose, her presence commanding yet warm. Come with me, she said, her tone leaving no room for refusal but laced with kindness. Henry looked up, wary. No suits, no boardrooms, just 1 hour, please. Reluctantly, he followed. As they stepped into the heart of the building, the air shifted. Laughter spilled from a nearby room, bright and unfiltered. The walls were adorned with colorful handprints, smudged testaments to joy. The scent of fresh bread mingled with something intangible. Hope, perhaps. Carolyn led him to a playroom tucked at the back, where children darted between worn toys and bursts of new laughter. This place, she began, her voice softening, is called Thomas's Place. It's named after a man who gave me a coat when I was 12. He didn't say much, just stayed with me through the cold. That night, he saved my life. Henry stood silent, his expression unreadable. Carolyn turned to face him. And last week, someone else gave me a coat. Didn't know who I was, didn't ask for anything in return, just gave it. Her eyes held his, searching. You remind me of him, Henry, not just because of the coat, but because of who you are. Henry blinked slowly, his jaw tightening as he fought the emotion welling behind his eyes. I don't need you to fit into a corporate mold, she continued. I need you to show people what it means to care. The sound of a child's giggle nearby nearly undid him. Henry swallowed hard, nodding, not for a paycheck or a title, but because, for the first time in years, he felt like he might still have something to offer. There was no fanfare, no grand announcement. Carolyn simply stood beside him in a meeting room, her voice clear as she introduced him to a small group. This is Henry Miles. He's here to help us build something that matters more than profit. The response was polite but reserved. An executive arched a skeptical brow. Another's fingers drummed restlessly on a tablet. Henry didn't waver. He had no polished slides, no jargon-laden pitch. He just spoke. I used to build things, he began, his voice steady. Bridges, schools, hospitals. Now I sweep construction sites, patch leaky gutters, sleep in a truck parked behind a warehouse. A few faces shifted, some uneasy, others intrigued. I don't have an MBA, he admitted, but I know what it's like to walk into an interview with worn-out shoes and a pocket full of hope. I know what it feels like to hold your son's hand and swear things will get better, even when you're not sure you believe it. He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And I know this, people don't quit jobs because of weak coffee or lagging computers. They leave because no one sees them. His words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the room. He didn't lecture, he asked questions. Do you know the name of the janitor on your floor? When was the last time you listened without planning your next sentence? What would you do if someone broke down in the break room? Over time, Henry became the pulse of Heartbridge Capital. At first, people approached him out of curiosity. Then they came with their stories. An intern shared her struggle with panic attacks. A senior manager admitted she hadn't spoken to her husband in days. Henry didn't solve their problems. He listened, offered coffee, shared quiet wisdom, or simply sat in silence when words weren't enough. The office began to hum with life. Laughter returned, not forced but genuine. People moved with purpose, pausing to connect, to speak with care. A quote Henry had once shared began to spread, scribbled on sticky notes and pinned to cubicles. You're not broken, you're just tired. Being tired doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've cared for too long without someone caring back. It appeared on monitors, in the break room, even etched onto a mug left on Caroline's desk. With Caroline's support and a modest housing stipend from the company, Henry signed a lease. No more nights in his truck, no more makeshift shelters. His new home was simple: a porch, a space heater, a coffee pot that didn't sputter. On the wall hung a framed photo of Noah at 7, his crayon-drawn smile beaming. Henry whispered to it, I'm trying, buddy, I really am. Over quiet evenings, he and Caroline talked, not about work, but about life. Books they loved, her childhood, Lily, his late wife, and Noah. Do you see him often? She asked once. Henry shook his head. Not yet. The caseworker needs 6 months of stability, safe housing, steady income. I'm close, Caroline smiled softly. I think you're already there. That night, Caroline stood by her window, Henry's olive green jacket draped over her arm. It still carried a faint scent of soap and memory. For the first time in years, she felt unburdened, as if the weight of the world wasn't hers alone to carry. The idea for the company's volunteer day was Caroline's, but its spirit was Henry's. One small act can rewrite a life. For a single day, Hartbridge Capital would close its doors. Employees would fan out across the city, serving at soup kitchens, shelters, and classrooms. At the heart of the initiative stood a glass display case in the lobby, holding Henry's frayed jacket, duct tape on one elbow, cuffs worn thin. Below it, a plaque read, "This coat changed the world because kindness doesn't wait until it's convenient." Henry hadn't come to Hartbridge to lead. He'd come because of one stormy night, one selfless choice. But sometimes the smallest gesture becomes the greatest pivot point. Sometimes the man with nothing left to give gives everything. Across town, a caseworker flipped through Henry's file, her eyes scanning the pages deliberately. Henry sat across from her, palms damp, gaze fixed on the floor. "New address?" she asked. He nodded. "Employment verification?" Another nod. "Hartbridge Capital, Cultural Development Team." She raised an eyebrow, impressed. "That's a big name." Henry offered a shy smile. "Stable income, housing, no violations. You've met every requirement." Henry's throat tightened, his voice barely a whisper. "So can I see him?" The caseworker's expression softened. "You can do more than that." His hands shook as he reached for the doorbell. No trumpets sounded, no banners waved. All Henry wanted was for his son to know him. The door creaked open, revealing a boy, taller now, maybe 15, with the same eyes, the same lopsided smile, a game controller dangling from one hand. For a moment, they just stared. Then Noah blinked, stepped closer, squinting. "Dad?" Henry nodded, unable to speak. Noah dropped the controller and threw his arms around his father. The embrace fierce, stitching together years of separation. "You kept your promise," Noah said, his voice muffled. Henry couldn't respond, but his eyes said it all. Later, a soft knock interrupted Henry's thoughts. He looked up to see Caroline. "Hey," she said, smiling. "I heard Noah's back." Henry's face lit up. "Yeah. First dinner together in 5 years." She handed him a folded paper. "This came in." Henry opened it slowly, revealing an offer for a full-time position at Hartbridge. Benefits, family support, flexibility, and a family reintegration bonus. He blinked, stunned. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice thick. Caroline's smile widened. "You didn't have to." Caroline tilted her head, her eyes catching the faint glow of the street lamp. "I know," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed to defy the biting chill of the Manhattan evening. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Henry Miles, a man whose life had once been measured in blueprints and steel beams, now walked his son Noah to school each morning. A steaming coffee cup warmed his hands, his scarf dancing in the crisp autumn breeze. Noah, 15 and growing taller by the day, sketched quietly on the porch of their new home, his crayons breathing life into smudged paper. Henry sat beside him, a book open on his lap, stealing glances at his son's focused expression. In those moments, the world felt whole again, as if the jagged edges of their past had been smoothed by time and care. Carolyn Hart, the fiercely driven CEO of Hartbridge Capital, found herself sharing takeout with Henry on a park bench, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. At Thomas's place, the shelter she'd built in memory of a man who'd once shown her kindness, volunteers rolled paint onto walls, crafting a vibrant mural that seemed to pulse with hope. Henry's words were scrawled across it in bold letters. "Kindness doesn't demand perfection, just presence." Those words had come from a man who'd once doubted his own worth, who'd wondered if he'd ever matter again, if he could rebuild anything that lasted, if hope was a luxury reserved for others. Now hope was his constant companion. It sat across from him at the dinner table, chuckled with him in meetings, and walked beside him as he picked Noah up from school. A year earlier, Carolyn had stood at a podium, her voice steady, but her heart racing. Behind her, framed in glass, hung the worn olive jacket Henry had given her on a freezing night. Its patches and frayed edges told a story of sacrifice. A year ago, she began, addressing a room filled with employees, volunteers, and curious onlookers. A man gave me his only coat. He didn't know my name or my title. He didn't ask for anything in return. He just gave. That single act didn't just warm me that night. It reshaped the soul of this company. It reminded us that success without heart is nothing but failure dressed up in a suit. She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd until it landed on him. "Henry, will you join me up here?" The room erupted in applause. Not the polite kind, but a thunderous, heartfelt roar that seemed to lift Henry from his seat. He stepped onto the stage, his simple black suit pressed and unassuming, his presence quiet but undeniable. Carolyn handed him a small envelope, her smile soft but knowing. He opened it, his breath catching as he read the deed to a new home, stamped and official. "No, no more trucks," she whispered, her eyes glinting with mischief and care. Henry couldn't find words. He nodded, his throat tight, his heart too full to speak. "I kept something too," he said after a moment, his voice low but steady. From his pocket, he drew a small silver ring, its simplicity a mirror of his own humility. Carolyn's eyes shimmered as she blinked back tears. "You said the coat changed your life," he continued, his gaze locked on hers. "But you changed mine. You gave me my son back. You gave me a reason to keep trying. Caroline Langston Hart, will you marry me?" The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation. Then Caroline laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that broke the tension, and nodded through her tears. "Yes," she said, and the crowd erupted again, their cheers echoing into the night. Their wedding wasn't held in some glittering ballroom with chandeliers and tuxedoed waiters. Instead, it unfolded at Thomas's place, where second chances were woven into every brick and hope carried the scent of freshly baked bread. The chairs were mismatched, scavenged from donations and thrift stores. The cake, slightly lopsided but made with love, was crafted by an intern Henry had mentored. The ring bearer, a young boy from the shelter, tripped twice but grinned through it all. The guests weren't Manhattan's elite. They were volunteers, janitors, single parents, caseworkers, shelter staff, and a handful of kids with glitter smeared across their cheeks. But the love in that room was unmistakable, a living, breathing force that seemed to hold everyone together. Henry stood at the end of the aisle, his dark suit crisp, his face clean-shaven, no tie. Just that same quiet look in his eyes, open and deeply human. Noah stood beside him, taller now, his smile radiant as he watched his father. Caroline's voice didn't falter as she spoke her vows. "You gave me your only coat," she said, her words carrying the weight of their shared journey. "Tonight I give you my entire life, not because you saved me, but because you reminded me what it feels like to truly feel." Henry's eyes glistened, his throat tight, but his hands held hers firmly, never wavering. Nearby, Noah helped a younger boy open a juice box, his movements gentle and practiced. An old, upright piano filled the air with a simple, familiar tune, its notes warm and inviting. Carolyn leaned against Henry's shoulder, her gaze drifting over the scene. "We didn't plan any of this," she murmured. "No," Henry replied, his voice soft but certain. "But somehow it's perfect." Behind them, displayed on an easel, was the olive jacket, preserved in a glass frame. Its faded fabric and torn edges were no longer signs of wear, but of something eternal. That image, the jacket, Henry, Caroline, and Noah together, would later spread across the internet, shared and reposted with thousands of comments and millions of hearts. The coat was never meant to be a symbol. It was just fabric, thin and frayed. But in Henry's selfless act, it had become something sacred. Months later, Henry stood before a room of weary entrepreneurs, delivering a keynote with the quiet confidence of a man who'd found his purpose. "The most successful people I know," he said, "are the ones who never forgot what it felt like to be invisible." Carolyn, meanwhile, launched the One Kindness Fund, a foundation offering startup grants to kids aging out of foster care. Noah taught art classes at Thomas's place, his crayon drawings filling every corner with color and possibility. At a bus stop one winter evening, Alman a young man slipped off his hoodie and handed it to an elderly woman shivering in the cold. He didn't say a word, just nodded and walked away. One small act of kindness, Henry knew, could rewrite a life. He no longer built bridges of steel, but he crafted moments, conversations, quiet sparks in forgotten places. And sometimes that was all the world needed. Not perfection, not credentials, just presence, just heart.